welcome to another Lawn Fawn video. Today we're taking a look at the new Lift the Flap tree background. This is a fun die that cuts a whole background with these fun trees and these openings in the trees that open like little doors to reveal surprises or critters inside. So let's take a look at what this cuts out and let's make a few cards. So for my first card here, I've cut this background out of some kraft cardstock, and you can see there all the stitching details that it cuts and those little doors into the trees that open, and it cuts a score line at each of those so they hinge open, just like you can see I'm doing there. But I'm going to keep those closed for the moment right now. I'm not going to crease those hinges yet because I'm going to do some inking on this piece of kraft cardstock. So I'm just going to use some tea dye distress ink and a blending brush here to add some color to the edges of these trees so that they have some dimension and some variation in color and don't look so flat. And I'm actually going to use a piece of scrap paper and put that underneath that little round door there so that I can ink up the edge of the door and it will stand out against the tree trunk below it. I like that these little doors hinge on different sides. So you have two that hinge on the right and then one that hinges on the left, just for even more variation in this fun design. So I'm basically adding this ink to the sides of the trunks. And you can see there I've lifted that so that I don't get the edge of my door. So now that I've got the tea dye ink where I like it and where I want it, I'm going to go in with some vintage photo, which is a bit darker, and just darken up a couple other places around the bases of those trees. I'm also going to darken up those little flaps to give them even more definition from the tree trunk that's around it. Just a little bit of ink, not too much. But you can see that those two colors of ink and that kraft cardstock together give a nice variation and natural look to these trees. So now that I've got the base of my card done with those trees, I'm going to pull out some pattern paper that's going to be my background. And I am going with this little white polka dot on blue for my sky from the new Into the Woods Remix collection. And I'm just going to cut that to the size of an A2 size card and just layer that right onto a card base. Now I can put my trees right on top of that. But before I do that, I wanted to fill them in so that you don't see that sky behind the tree. So I have a piece of chocolate bar cardstock, and I'm just taking each one of those openings and lightly tracing them with a pencil. So this will give me a guide on how big to cut these pieces that I'm going to layer behind my trees. So I'm just going to roughly cut outside of that line, just enough so I have some cardstock to put some glue on so that I can layer that behind them. And once I have all those cut, I'm just going to put a light line of glue around it on the outside of that pencil line. And then I'm actually going to take my trees and pick this up. So instead of trying to layer that behind, I'm going to pick it up with the trees. And I'm also laying out where I wanted my little squirrels to be on each of these windows because I'm going to have to put those in at the same time because I want to make sure that I can tuck them behind. So that's also why I'm using some liquid glue, so I have a little time to play with those. So you can see there how I'm going to fit that little squirrel into that opening. So I'll just lay that over, lining up my pencil line, which you can't really see, so I did not bother erasing it. And then I'm going to tuck my little squirrel in there. So his little tail is going to be tucked behind the door. And then I'll just add a little bit of liquid glue under him to hold him in place. But since I use liquid glue for those little backer pieces, it's easy to slide him between the two pieces before it's dry. Now for the little one here. My glue was sticking to my fingers just a little bit. And I'm going to go ahead and put these acorns on the bottom of this circle because these are going to be inside the opening of the tree as well. So I'll just go ahead and put those on there, and then I can just put this whole piece behind the tree as one. And you want to make sure you don't have any glue outside of that because you don't want your flap to get stuck down. So I'm doing the same thing for this one on the right as I did for the one on the left. I'm going to layer that piece on there, and then I'm going to take my little squirrel and tuck him in. So I love this cute little, Kelly calls it the yay squirrel. He is my favorite too, the little squirrel saying yay. So once I get him in there the way I want, and I'm just tucking his feet in, and I'm going to let him kind of pop out of that hole, then I'll just tuck these pieces into my little hole here. So the two little squirrels, they kind of peek out of the little doors, and then the acorns will be completely hidden when it's closed. So for my card, I'm going to finish off the frame. I've cut a stitch rectangle frame from some chocolate bar cardstock, and I'm just going to layer that on the frame that the die cuts. You could, of course, just leave that kraft color if you wanted, but I like the way this darker frame frames up my little scene of my trees. So I'm just making sure that's lined up, and then I can take this whole piece that I've created and put that onto that pattern paper card base that I've made. And I just love the look of that blue pattern paper as the sky behind these trees. Next, I'm going to add some leaves to my trees. I'm using these leaf dies from the Leafy Tree Backdrop Portrait die, and I've cut my leaves from 2 colors of green cardstock. So these are cut from cilantro cardstock and noble fir cardstock because I thought I would make a nice summery scene with my squirrels here. So I'm just going to vary the colors that I've used and the shapes, and I'm just placing these around where I want them. So I'm not gluing them down just yet. I'm going to get them all placed where I want them first, and then I'll work on gluing them down. So once I have them glued down, I'll just pick each of them up, put a little dot of glue, and drop them back into place. So now I'm adding one or more of my little squirrels. This is the one that's like running. So I thought he would be cute up in the branches of the trees, kind of running around, jumping from tree to tree. This is what the squirrels where I live like to do for sure. And then now I'm going to work on my sentiment. So I've cut a curved banner from some speckled eggshell cardstock. I'm just using the edge of it to curve the sentiment that I'm going to use. So I'm just using it as a guide, and then I'm going to check that it is lined up correctly. I'm going to ink up that sentiment using some walnut ink. I thought that the brown would go very well with the brown trees that I have on this card. And this sentiment says, "I'm here for you when life gets nutty," which I just think is super cute. I'm putting some foam squares on the back of that so I can pop it up from my tree background just a little bit. And then I'm just going to layer it on the bottom. And I just like the movement that that curved banner gives. And then I have one last little squirrel here. I call this one the baby squirrel because he seems smaller than the rest. And I'm going to sit him like he's sort of sitting on my sentiment banner here, which I just think is super cute. So here is my card all finished, and I just love how those little squirrels hide inside those trees until you open up those doors. For my second card, I am making a fall themed card, and I cut the trees for this one out of some narwhal cardstock, and I think that the gray trees kind of give a unique look. So for this one, I'm going to create a canopy for the top of the trees in some fall colors. So I have some sunflower cardstock here that I've cut with the stitch rectangle that matches the same shape. And I'm going to use the largest of the puffy cloud border dies to create a canopy for my trees at the top. So you can see I've layered that piece of cardstock behind my trees so that I can see my trees. And then I'm going to lay this die, this border die, kind of where I want it. So I'm making sure that I don't cover up all those fun branches at the top. I want you to see a little bit of those. So once I kind of have that where I want it, I'm just going to sort of slide out the trees from behind it. And now I know sort of how far down I need it. And I'll just hold that in place with a piece of washi tape and run that through my die cut machine. And this will create my yellow tree canopy at the top. I'm going to do the same thing with the ground at the bottom. I've cut a little piece of cilantro cardstock with that same stitched rectangle, and I'm just using one of the simple hillsides to cut the bottom, and I'm making sure it's very low. I don't want it too high because I'm going to be putting some critters down here on the ground, and I don't want them to be too far up. I don't want them to cover up my little holes in my trees. I'm going to add a little bit of ink to each of these die cut pieces to add some definition to the edge. So for the tree canopy, I'm using some spice marmalade along the edges, so a little bit of orange to darken it up. And then for the ground and the grass, I'm going to use some lucky clover along the edge. I'm also going to add some splatters of white watercolor paint to the tree canopy, just for some texture in that tree canopy up there. I've got a piece of spiffy speckles paper cut with that same stitch rectangle. This is going to be the sky that goes behind my trees, but before I do any of that, I want to layer some cardstock behind those openings in my trees so that you don't see blue coming through it. So you can see there, that's what it looks like if you don't do this step, which if that's the look you're going for, that's great. But for me, I wanted it to be dark behind there so that I can hide some critters in those trees. So I'm going to use the same technique I did on the first card. I've got a piece of storm cloud cardstock here, and I'm just going to trace each of these holes with a pencil so that I know where to cut them out. So I'm just going to freehand cut on the outside of those circles with my scissors, leaving some space for some glue. So for this one, I did things a little different. I'm going to cut off that frame that you see on the edge. So you can see I'm laying my pieces and I'm marking where they kind of fall. And I'm going to trim off that frame. So when these pieces are layered on here, I'm just going to see the trees and not the frame on the left and the right side. So I'm layering that grass on the bottom. You can see it covered up the frame. And then I'm going to do the same for the tree canopy at the top. And now I'm going to fill in my trees. So I am using the Jump for Joy stamp set for this one, and also the little mouse from Dandy Day. And I just thought it would be super cute to use some different critters than the squirrels and show you that they fit inside these trees as well. I'm not so sure that hedgehogs live inside trees, but mine does. And he fits perfectly in that tree on the left. And then I've got that little owl that I'm going to put in that tree on the right. And he's peeking out. So when the little door is closed, you're still going to see him a little bit. And I just had a little bit of overhang, so that's what I was trimming off there. And then I'm going to do the little mouse in the middle. So now that I have all that set up the way I want it, I'm going to take that Spiffy Speckles blue paper that I cut earlier, put it on a card base, and then I can glue this whole thing down. So you can see this gives you a different look without that frame. So I'm using the little fox and the pile of leaves from Jump for Joy. That's what I'm layering on the bottom. So you can see now why I wanted that ground at the bottom to be so low. I'm popping those up with some foam squares so they have a little bit of dimension in front of those trees. And I actually did not end up using the rake. I didn't like the way it looked. But I'm using a couple of these little leaves from the Jump for Joy set. I've got that little mouse blowing one, which I think is super cute. And then I just sprinkled a couple others around that have fallen off the tree. And then finally for my sentiment, I wanted to put it up in the tree canopy, but I thought it would look too crowded, and I really liked the way this looked without a sentiment. So for this particular card, I'm just going to stamp the sentiment on the inside of the card. I don't think that the sentiment always has to be on the front. So I'm going to close those little flaps so I can open up my card here. And again, I'm going to use that walnut ink. And I'm just going to stamp out the sentiment, and this is from the Jump for Joy set that says, "So thankful for your kindness." And now this card is all finished. I love those little critters hiding inside those trees, and I love that you can use this new die with some of your older sets as well. Now let's take a look at some examples from the design team. I love Elise's cute little scene, and I like that she layered her sentiment over the third tree for a different look, showing you can use your die in different ways. I also love Lynette's beautiful card. I love that sunsetty sky that she created, and I love the use of the big acorns at the top. I love Elena's card. I love the soft colors she used for the background and those bold leaves up front. And those squirrels look like they're having so much fun. Audrey created a really cool canopy for her trees, but she did it behind her trees by inking her background, and I just love the unique look that this has. I also love how she used the speech bubbles for her sentiment. Maureen created a really fun slimline card by cutting those lift the flap trees apart. She used 2 at the top, and she also used the pile of leaves from Jump for Joy to create her tree canopy. Grace's card has me ready for fall with that beautiful ink blended sunset fall sky, and I love how she pulled in the mushrooms from Gleeful Gardens to help set her scene. That little squirrel sitting on the mushroom is too cute. And Megan's card is beautiful with that pink blended background and those teal leaves that really pop. And I just love her basket full of giant acorns. It's just so much fun with these little squirrels. Here's another look at the 2 cards I made in today's video with those little critters hiding in the trees. Thanks so much for watching. Have an amazing day. Bye!